Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today I'm filming Friday Reads on Thursday because I'm going to be out of town on Friday when you get this video. So I hope that you've been having a good week in your reading and in your life in general. Mine's been pretty good, and I did kind of have some reading challenges this week. I'll get into that in just a minute. As far as TV goes, I thought we were up to the last episode of Fargo, but there's one more. And I have hopes and thoughts about how this turns out, and I'm not sure what will actually happen because the Coen brothers kind of plotting that happens in Fargo, but we will see. And then I'm very excited that in this upcoming week, the new season of True Detective is coming out with Jodie Foster, and it's getting really good reviews. And it's set in Alaska, and it just looks dark and sinister and good. So I am looking forward to that. 'Cause, nothing says cozy winter viewing like Alaska and murder. So, yes. So we're just going to roll right into the reading. I was finishing Case Histories last week, I think, when I was filming. I did finish it, concluded a really good buddy read with Debbie, and we both really enjoyed the book. It was her first time and my second time reading it, and I have a plan to gradually read through the Jackson Brodie series over this year, leading up to the release of the new book in the series that's coming out in the fall. I forget what it's called, but it's August or September, I can't remember, or October. Later this year, a new one is coming out, number 6 in the series. So I'm gonna reread my way up to that point. But in this story, as the front cover indicates, there are 3 intertwined things that happened at different points in time, different decades, and there are family members in each case that have some kind of unresolved thing about a missing person, a murder, something, that they all contact Jackson Brodie, the former police officer turned private investigator. They contact him for his help. He solves some but not all of these mysteries, and then he has things going on with his own personal character. We do have the trope of the hot mess detective who is always kind of, his personal life is in chaos. He has a poor relationship with his ex-wife, and there's a daughter involved, and some unattended health issues that kind of cause problems. And he's a mess, but a likable mess. And Kate Atkinson is a master of intertwining plots. You do have to be okay with a lot of coincidence being at play in a story. And if that bothers you, it could run thin for you. But if you're okay with that, it's really fun to watch the plot come together like a drawstring on a bag by the end of the book. I also have a couple of ongoing reads. Now here's the thing that I found out this week. I don't like trying to read 3 things at once. Last year I made the leap of moving away from being a one book at a time only person to off and on being able to carry a second book. This works if the second book is a different genre or time period, or one's fiction, one's nonfiction, or a classic that I'm reading slowly alongside something else. So it started out okay to be reading Bleak House along with whatever else was going on, but then I overbooked myself in January and found myself needing to read 3 things at a time in order to stay afloat of all of the different reading events that I wanted to participate in. Now, I did it to myself, and I don't have to do any of these things, but I wanted to. And so I thought, well, I'll just read a little bit of this and that. And it became unfun, not fun to read when I got up to 3 things at once. And trying to carry Bleak House and the other book, and then start to read A Winter's Tale by Shakespeare. My brain, they're just like a wall was reached. A wall was reached. So Bleak House, once again, did not fare well this week. I did read a little bit. I read some last night because I had finished another book that I'm going to talk about that I also squeezed into this week. I when I read, I'm trying to think like recent Dickens reads. I've read David Copperfield as a book on the side, and I had no problem. I was engaged in it. I was always happy to get back to it. This one I'm having struggle with, and I think if I was just reading it by itself, maybe I wouldn't be having this problem. But the off and on nature, I'm just not feeling that involved in this plot. I love the main character Esther. Whenever it gets to the part called Esther's Narrative, I really like that, and I'm very intrigued about Lady Deadlock and what her story is. But in general, I'm just having trouble being excited to come back to it. And I feel really guilty about it because I've always assumed I'm going to really love this book from everything I've heard. So I'm up to page 322. So I don't feel like I'm going to bail, but it is moving at a glacial pace. All right, and as I mentioned, I am also trying to read A Winter's Tale by Shakespeare. I have read some of it. I've put some comments in on the Discord. This is with Melinda at Web of Stories Discord called The Bard Room, where she is pulling out of a hat, or maybe a tin or a bag. I can't remember what she pulled it out of, but she's pulling out a Shakespeare play a month. And that is the reading challenge. And so, again, I'm enjoying reading the play, but I'm reading it so slowly. So I've undercut myself this month, and I have no one but myself to blame, and I shall not do this to myself in February. That statement on video might come back to haunt me, but we shall see. Another book that I had to read this week because of a reading event was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Again, a book that I have loved and read a number of times, but I had to hustle to get this in because the discussion is coming up in a few days. This is for an in-person thing, the banned book club at my local library. So I did want to read it on time. And my other reason that I wanted to read it right now is to prepare for the release of James by Percival Everett, which is coming out in March, which is a reimagining of the story based from the perspective of Jim, the runaway slave. My experience of this book is first reading it in high school and finding it rather boring. And, the teacher's always, oh, it's so great. It's one of the great novels and it's funny and da-da-da. And we're all reading it and going, yeah, it's all right. Then I read it again in college, and all of a sudden it was 100 times better. And I think it was more about me moving into adulthood than how great the professor was. But I mean, it helped to have somebody more enthusiastic at the helm than a teacher who's tried to make a class of high school students read it every year for the past 40 years. So I was really enjoying this book again. I love Huck's narrative voice in this book. He's just at an age where he is examining what he has been taught, what he's learned in the society he is in, and he's looking at and noticing the hypocrisy of adults, what they're asking him to do or telling him is right versus what he's witnessing in their behavior, and then ultimately having to make some moral decisions of his own. And just the gradual opening of his mind during his long sojourn with Jim. So if you did not grow up in the U.S., maybe you have not read Huckleberry Finn. Usually a lot of us have read it along the way in school, but it is the story of a young boy. His age is not exactly given, but he seems kind of 12-ish. He grows up with a very abusive father, and he has been placed in the care of a local widow. And she's doing her best. She sends him to school. She has him fed. She has him well dressed. He feels constrained and confined by her requirements to behave properly, even though he's grateful for the comforts of this home that he is living in. And there is a legal dispute going on with his abusive and alcoholic father who is trying to reclaim him. And we get into things of like a local judge who doesn't know the whole backstory and is believing some of the BS that his father is telling him. And in the midst of all of this chaos and this back and forth and these difficult circumstances, he just decides to run away. I don't want to give away some of the details of how he pulls this off because that's part of the fun of the book. But shortly into his adventure, he comes across Jim, a local slave who has also run away. And Jim's plan, Jim is an adult man, and his plan is to make it to the Free States and then save up so that he can free his wife and eventually also his children. So the stakes are a lot higher for Jim than they are for Huck, and Huck doesn't really understand this at first. And the parts of the book that are the best are the parts where Huck and Jim are just on the river, enjoying life, watching a sunrise, and Huck is slowly starting to reflect upon society and life and himself and Jim and what is important in this life. But we have a lot of side trails, a lot of crazy plot twists. And I was thinking upon this particular reading, I feel like it gets a little bit, for me, it gets a little off the track and too drawn out in the center with all of the stuff about the king and the duke. Which, if you have not read this book, there is a part in the plot where Jim and Huck meet these two guys who are con artists, and they just kind of travel from town to town, and they have a whole collection of different little schemes that they do to make money. Whether it's, well, actually the two didn't know each other. They both were kind of in this line of work, but they meet up. Everybody meets up, and it's things like quack medicines, fake healing events, bad stage shows, phrenology, where you read somebody's future through their head. I don't really know. Phrenology and seances and all that kind of stuff come up in books from this era. But anyway, they just have this whole kind of bag of tricks that they combine their bags of tricks together, and they go on this kind of con spree to make money. And at first it's comical, and then it just kind of goes on a little bit too long for my liking. And although the main, the takeaway from it is that Huck at first thinks it's great fun, and then he also gets tired of it, and then he gets kind of enlightened about the nature of people who are in it only for the money and at the cost of anybody else. And so there is eventually a character and plot pivot due to this part, but it goes on for a long time, and I'm just like, can we get back to the river? The Huck and Jim parts are the good parts. So anyway, but I did enjoy reading it again, and I love the slow and gradual evolution of Huck as he starts to step into this adult world and decide what kind of person he is going to choose to be. And just the difficulty of realizing that everything you've taught about the order of the world is not necessarily right. There's a foreword in my edition that really sums it up so well, and it doesn't give away any plot points. So I'm going to read it to you, and if you have never read this book, I hope that this inspires you to give it a try at some point. Although most readers encounter the novel in their adolescence, often reading the novel or parts of a novel at an age when Huck Finn seems more peer than protagonist, this is no kid's book. This is a novel about murder, child abuse, broken families, animal cruelty, bloody feuds, deception, ignorance, racism, slavery, economic degradation, and hypocrisy. It is a virtual tour through the evils that humans inflict on others in the absence of a social conscience. It is a novel in which the antics of juvenile delinquents are far outstripped by the inexplicable, twisted, and immoral behavior of adults. And yet, it is one of the funniest books ever written, with one of the most charming and decent first-person narrators ever to grace the printed page. And I agree with all of that. That's how I feel about Huck Finn. And I guess I should tell you who wrote this introduction, and it was Eric Carl Link, Professor of American Literature and Department of the Chair of English at the University of Memphis. All right, so that's my take on Huck Finn. It'll be interesting to see what comes up at the banned book club discussion. Usually, this book has been banned and banned and banned again. A lot of it is from the prolific use of the N-word, which of course is in the context of the time period of the South in the 1840s. I'll be interested to hear what other grounds it has been challenged on besides the language. After Huck Finn, I read a book for fun that I heard about on another channel, and that is The Wolf Suit by Sid Sharp. Now, I saw this book on Lindy's channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads, and Lindy often highlights graphic novels and children and young adult literature as part of her overall reading. And this one caught my eye, and I found out that my library had it. And it is a delightful children's graphic novel. Sid Sharp is a Canadian artist, and this is their first book. They use they, their pronouns and live in Toronto, Canada. I love the artwork in this book, and I love the story. It is about a sheep, and the sheep has a terrific name, Bellwether Rigwelter. And it starts out, Bellwether Rigwelter had been dreaming about flowers. And Bellwether is a sheep who is very nervous about venturing out into the woods near his house to get the flowers and berries that he loves because he's afraid of the wolves out there. And he goes out, his anxieties about the wolves kind of ruin his trips outdoors, and so he decides to also use his sewing skills to make himself a wolf suit. For example, here is Bellwether thinking about going outside, and then we have a 2-page wordless spread of the outside, and it is both beautiful and ominous with faces and shadows, and just the saturation of color is amazing. And the story is very simple. He makes himself a suit, and he thinks, okay, this is going to solve the problem. I'm going to go out in my wolf suit, and then nobody's going to bother me. But he finds out there's some drawbacks to going out covered up in a suit. You can't smell the berries as well, and you can't hear the birds as well, and it's hot and it's itchy. Not all it's cracked up to be, but he feels safe. But then he meets some other wolves, and they buy into his disguise, and they invite him to a wolf party, and this makes him even more nervous because he doesn't know if he can maintain the facade. And I won't tell you what happens anymore because it would spoil it, but let's just say he encounters some challenges with the integrity of his costume, and he finds some surprises along the way. And it's really, the illustrations are beautiful. The story is charming. Here he is with the other wolves that he meets. And it has a very classic children's book theme about being yourself, being authentic, finding the right friends, and just having to deal with and face your fears and anxieties and finding support. And so kids really love these kind of themes, younger kids. And this is the kind of book that makes me, now I never miss not working full-time. I love being retired, but I do miss sharing books with kids from my former life as a children's librarian. This would have been a really fun one to share in a story time. And you can read this book on more than one level. Being able to step out as yourself without feeling afraid, without feeling nervous, and do what you love. That works on its own. But you could also read, knowing that the author is non-binary, you can also read that on that other level about not having, finding your identity and not having to conceal it or downplay yourself. So there's many different ways to read it, and I enjoyed it quite thoroughly. And I love this artist's work, so I'm going to see what else. I don't know, I think this is their first book, but I want to take a look online at just their artwork and see what other kinds of things they have created. So that is The Wolf Suit by Sid Sharp. Then last but not least, after sort of being immersed for a few days in some historical fiction with Bleak House and Huck Finn and the Shakespeare, I had a craving to read something a little more contemporary, and so I picked up from my cart Blackwater, Lightship by Colm Toibin. This is one of the books. After I read Brooklyn, I started accumulating books by Toibin, but had not read any of them yet. And so I was flipping through a few different possible books to read to finish out this week, and this was the one that was calling my name. So this is set in the 1990s in Ireland, and it begins with Helen, who is a woman who she's a school principal. She's married. She has 2 young sons, and it starts with a very quotidian scene about one of her little boys that wakes up in the night with bad dreams, and taking him in to her bed so he can calm down and go back to sleep, and just sort of showing us her daily life. And the school term is about to end. Her husband teaches at a different school, and they have a big party at the house to celebrate his end of term at an Irish school. And she's also looking forward to some downtime because her husband's going to take the kids out of town, and she's going to meet up with them after a few days, and all she really has to do is interview some teachers for the upcoming school year. Well, something happens that turns everything upside down, because a young man shows up and tells her that her brother, Declan, that she hasn't been in close contact with, is very ill. And Helen finds out very quickly, this is all at the very beginning, so I'm not giving anything away. Declan has AIDS, and he's dying. And he has known he has it, and he has been having ups and downs in his health for several years, but he has not told the family. And he has now he wants her to go and tell their mother and their grandmother. The women are not close. They are estranged. They are not completely out of contact, but there's issues and boundaries between these women. But Helen agrees, because they all love Declan, and she goes first to the grandmother and then to the mother to tell them what has transpired, and that Declan, when he gets out of the hospital, he wants to go and stay at his grandmother's home. So from the flyleaf, I do learn that they're all going to converge at this house, and also with a couple of Declan's close friends. So it's a family saga. They're going to have to sort through some of these problems and baggages of the past if they're going to band together to care for Declan. I mean, I just love a kind of a story like this. And just the scene, there's a long, painful drive with Helen and her mother to... it's just really good stuff. I love a book that when nothing much is happening, that's when everything is happening, and you're seeing into these people's lives. Helen is going back through some memories of when she had to stay at this grandmother's house during the time of her father's final illness. And so we have right at the beginning this juxtaposition of her 2 young sons versus her memory of herself and her brother. So that is it on the reading. I'm in the middle of that book. I'm loving it so far. Let me know if you've ever read it. I know a number of people have encouraged me to read this, and now I'm happy that I'm actually doing it. Any thoughts on Huck Finn or these other books that I talked about, or what you have planned going into the weekend? I may or may not get a chance to hit my favorite independent bookstore this weekend, Book People in Austin. If I do, I will let you know all about it next week. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye.